Hey you guys, Shane Vance here. Now, a few months ago, I made a video on my top 5 most boring My Little Pony Friendship is Magic episodes. Well, I'm here today to do another video list of a show I enjoy from time to time, King of the Hill, created by Mike Judge that lasted for 13 seasons from 1997 to 2009. There have been many best and worst episodes lists featuring this show, but now it's time to cover the dullest of the dull. Well, here we go. This is my top 5 most boring King of the Hill episodes.
Boring!
Unfortunate Son. When Cotton and his old war buddies end up being evicted from their club since they've fallen behind on their bills, Hank attempts to bring in some Vietnam veterans in order to get their club back. While that is going on, Dale tries his hand at the hobby of falconry when he gets a falcon glove at the VFW fundraiser that happens earlier in the episode. Now, the reason why I put this episode on this list is because it's not only boring, but it's also forgettable since I barely remember much from this episode. Heck, any episode involving Cotton is guaranteed to be funny or at the very least, have some entertainment value, but this episode had Cotton only and is mildly amusing.
What? Well now where's my nudie channel?
Which is a bit of a downgrade for Cotton since he's a pretty larger-than-life character. Now, the episode does at least make an attempt to show off the different variety of retired war veterans and how one of those groups still need to be in therapy due to severe PTSD.
It's cool. We're just out of time.
And in all honesty, what we get from this is what is arguably the most entertaining part of the episode, where after Cotton and a friend of his pretend to fight, the Vietnam veterans have tragic flashbacks and they go insane.
Come on, people! Remember your breathing exercises!
We also get a very nice moment between Hank and Cotton where Cotton takes responsibility for everything going bad, something that Cotton very rarely does.
Sometimes you can do everything right and still lose. It ain't your fault. You gave it everything you had. That's all I ever asked of my men. Thanks for trying, soldier.
However, that still doesn't take away from how boring this episode is. Also, the side plot with Dale is also rather boring because the falcon he is carrying for just a tax bill whenever we cut back to Hank's friends. It's also a waste of a side plot because they could have gotten much comedic material out of this. How could have this episode been more entertaining? Well, first off, have Dale's side story be the main one because it could have been great to see Dale use the falcon for as much shenanigans as he possibly can. Also, Cotton's story about him saving his and his friend's club could have been a decent side story with Cotton up to his usual shenanigans. Overall, it's not a bad episode, but not one to write home about.
Boring!
Dreamweaver. In this episode, Dale takes up a vocational session on basket weaving since he has a particular interest in the hobby. When Hank joins him for the event, Dale ends up feeling insecure when Hank turns out to be so much better at basket weaving than he is. Meanwhile, Peggy and the neighbors attempt to recreate an event where a cowboy hat on Bill gets blown off by the wind and lands on Con. Unlike with Unfortunate Son, I do remember this episode, only it's pretty unremarkable. It's mostly just a typical Dale episode featuring him at his most insane. Now, Dale acting insane does make for some decent comedy like how Cotton does with his large ham appeal, but this is one instance where his insanity is more tiresome than anything. It's mostly just him acting jealous of Hank being better at something he loves.
I'm sorry, Griffin. My rage was directed at you, and it should have been directed at Hank. It's Hank who's trying to destroy my reputation. It's Hank who's standing between me and my dream job.
The episode does sort of become less boring once Dale tries to attack Hank with a forklift. But even then, it's completely short-lived and barely impacts the episode. And the resolution at the end where Hank actually feels sorry for the person who attacked him and gives him a happy ending just feels incredibly tacked on. What's also tacked on is that this basket weaving dream Dale has was never brought up before in the show, and nor was it brought up after this episode. The B-plot isn't really anything special either. It's just your typical creative viral video story that doesn't really do anything creative with the premise. How would this episode be more entertaining? Well, have Dale actually gain a desire to weave baskets instead of it being a previously unmentioned, and also have him go through some comedic hijinks just to improve his craft. Also, have the B-plot be about Bill actually trying to retrieve his hat when the wind blew it onto Khan's lawn and him refusing to return it. While it wouldn't be that interesting, seeing the lengths Bill goes to get back his hat would have been amusing. To conclude, this episode is alright for the most part with only a few beefs I have, but it's still pretty unremarkable.
Boring!
My Hair Lady. When Luann drops out of community college to be a full-time hairstylist, she ends up getting a job at a new salon named Hottie's when Bill gives her a loan to pay for her services. But since Bill is a co-owner, he has to stay with her, much to the dismay of the other stylists, but Bill soon adopts a homosexual persona in order to fit in with the stylists. Now, the main reason why I put this episode on the list is because I find it to be forgettable since there's not a lot to remember from this one. Heck, most of the time, we are either focused on Bill acting like a stereotypical gay man.
I can't keep living like this, Hank! You've got a wife and a family at home, and I've got nothing!
Or hearing Peggy nag Luann about going back to college.
That's the real world for you. Mr. Dotrieve getting kicked in the groin. Don't you wish you'd stayed in college?
Both of which do not do the episode any favors because of how repetitive they are. The few things that actually saves this episode from getting any lower is either a few funny moments.
Let's get you damn food!
Or Hank being the voice of reason as he actually supports Luann's decision to drop out of college, but gives her an earful in the episode's third half when Bill reveals his sexuality to the other barbers and gets fired as a result, and Luann doesn't stand up for him.
Well, I never told you to turn on your friends. Maybe your Aunt Peggy was right. You need to go back to college and take some courses in being a decent person.
Other than those two positives though, hardly anything else about My Hair Lady stands out and is one episode you might forget after watching it.
Boring!
Uncool Customer. Peggy begins to have a midlife crisis and goes on to befriend a cool-looking parent named Cat Savage and soon begins changing her lifestyle to one that's more exciting. As that's happening, Hank tries out a new restaurant, but soon begins to feel uncomfortable when said restaurant has an erratic seating policy. The main reason why this episode on the boring list is because of how cliché the A-plot is. It's your typical popularity-hungry storyline that's been covered in many other cartoons. The episode also has some cringy moments as well, like Peggy trying to talk in modern slang.
Hill's in the crib! Oh, yeah!
Even Kat confessing that she only pretends to be cool at the end just feels cliched.
See, I follow trends. All of them, no matter what. Piercings, colonics, trendy surgeries, online affairs. I've even done some street fighting.
All of this makes this plot of the episode incredibly predictable and makes me wish they had a creative way of going about it. The B-plot involving Hank trying to eat at the new restaurant without being bothered by the other patrons was kind of nice and did have some humorous moments.
That won't be necessary. I'd like it to go.
Sure. If you'll just have a seat, we'll bring it right out to you.
But unfortunately, it's often shoved to the side a little much and the way it ends feels more like an afterthought. Overall, Uncool Customer isn't a bad episode, but falls into the boring category on account of how cliched it is. Junkie Business. Hank hires a man named Leon to join Strickland Propane, but it soon becomes clear that Leon is a drug addict, but when Hank fires him, he is browbeaten by a representative of the local rehab facility to let Leon keep his job since a policy enables him to do so. This episode is boring in a bad sense. Why, you may ask? Because we are treated to the repetition of Leon messing up his duties due to being high on drugs, which wears out the episode.
There's more files here than there are stars in the universe.
This would go a lot faster if you helped.
I can't do this. You do it.
Heck, the policy that makes sure Leon doesn't get fired also bores out the episode, because said policy stipulates that anyone with a disability is exempt from being fired, which inspires the rest of the employees to make up disabilities to avoid doing their jobs, as if only one person using some rule to get out of trouble wasn't bad enough.
Debbie's got the yuppie flu, and Hector claims he has something called priapism?
What also bores out the episode is that Peggy repeatedly gives Hank a hard time due to thinking he has it for a Spanish woman who Hank interviewed but rejected. My God, woman, how paranoid are you?
I can't believe I'm getting hog-tied by a dope freak.
Well, of course you could have hired Maria Montalvo. The only accommodation she would have needed from you was a slobber guard. Now, if you can get her off your mind for 2 seconds, maybe we can get some sleep.
The biggest grievance I have with this episode is that this is from at a time when King of the Hill still had their A-game going on. While some episodes during this time like Husky Bobby were what I considered bad, this one is just boring at best and annoying at worst. If there are any positives to say about this episode, it would be that we get a return of Anthony Page, aka Twig Boy from the pilot. But even that redeeming element somewhat falters when Hank fails to remember who Anthony is. There was a deleted scene where he did, but they cut that out for some reason. How would I write this episode? Well, I'd have the whole disabilities policy plotline completely cut and just focus on Hank being slow to understand that Leon is a drug addict, which would have resulted in many funny moments on account of Hank's ignorance. Junkie Business is one of those episodes that just makes you feel annoyed and bored no matter what you do, and that is why it is also the most boring episode of King of the Hill. Well, that was my top 5 most boring King of the Hill episodes. I'm Shane Vance, and I'll see you later.